Thank you very much. Let's start. For attending this webinar. This webinar will present the lessons learned of the municipalities and utilities partnering for community resilience initiative. We've put everyone on mute, so the audio quality is better. And you can use the chat function to ask questions. Make sure to use the chat function, not the question and answer. It's been disabled, so just use the chat function. And we will answer, and Eddie and I will answer your question at the end of the presentation during the question and answer period. Also, we are recording this webinar, so you can share it with your colleagues if they couldn't attend today. We will also post it on our website. My name is Aida Nsiri, and I'm the Manager Policy and Research at Quest. And I will present this webinar with my colleague, Eddie Oldfield, Senior Lead Project and Advisory Services at Quest. And my colleague Charlotte Devilliers, Lead Digital Marketing and Design, will be moderating the chat and the question and answer period. For those of you who don't know Quest, we are a national non-government organization with bilingual staff located in 6 provinces. The organization is technology and fuel neutral and non-partisan. Quest works with communities, including municipal staff and officials, energy utilities, businesses, developers, and other key stakeholders to make energy systems local, affordable, and more efficient, as well as create an opportunity for economic prosperity. In other words, we work to grow smart energy communities in Canada. Smart energy community is one that recognizes the reality of community energy needs and priorities, integrates local renewable and conventional energy sources, efficiently, cleanly, safely, and affordably meets its energy needs. It's also a community that understands the compelling challenges of climate change. And resilience to climate hazards is an important component of smart energy communities. And this is why Quest has been leading the municipalities and utilities partnering for community resilience initiative. And we are pleased today to share with you key lessons learned. Here is the agenda for today's webinar. Eddie and I will present you the project and walk you through the key lessons learned and key challenges. Then we'll have a question and answer period. So this 2-year project was funded by Natural Resources Canada and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities as part of their Municipalities for Climate Innovation program. The initiative involved 12 municipalities, 3 in Prince Edward Island, 4 in New Brunswick, 2 in Manitoba, and 3 in Alberta. The project also involved natural gas and power utilities operating in these municipalities.
So welcome everybody and good afternoon or morning, wherever you may be. I'm Eddie Oldfield with Quest, and this project consisted of 3 key stages. We started with collecting data about climate change, current, historical, and future projected climate change along different greenhouse gas emission pathways. And we conducted a survey with each of the municipalities to learn more about what they had in place and where there may be areas of improvement. We then conducted an interactive workshop engaging key stakeholders in each community with 3 tabletop discussions and a mapping exercise. This utilized the 10 Essentials for Disaster Reduction from the United Nations International Strategy for Disaster Reduction and the Justice Institute of British Columbia's Rural Disaster Resilience Portal, allowing us to get a better understanding of the potential climate hazards, local risks, and vulnerabilities, and tapping into participants' knowledge. This resulted in identifying those key hazards and risks and vulnerabilities and resilience opportunities within each community. Quest then prepared a climate risk and vulnerability assessment report, including climate trends and projections and the analysis from those workshops and data gathering. The second phase was an action-oriented stage. So building on the findings of that work, Quest designed and delivered a second interactive and participatory workshop with the same stakeholder groups, Participants selected place-specific recommendations to address identified weaknesses based on the types of climate hazards in their community and the resources at their disposal. They prioritize them and assign a cost, a timeline, and a lead, and any other supporting materials or resources. Each participating community then received their resilience recommendation report. The report organizes the recommendations by the leads responsible and by priority for implementation. The third phase was one that enabled us to gather additional lessons learned. So here's a snapshot from 2 of the tabletop exercises during those workshops. It was a highly interactive process and allowed multiple different stakeholders to exchange knowledge and ground truth their understanding of climate change.
And so this project was particularly timely for 3 reasons. First, during the 2-year duration of the project, all the provinces we were working in experienced extreme weather events, similar to what is expected to happen based on climate projection. For example, New Brunswick experienced a 1 in 100-year flooding along the St. John River the 2 last springs. The post-tropical storm Dorian hit Prince Edward Island last September, as well as a major blizzard hurt Manitoba last November. Finally, in Alberta, there were severe wildfires in the northern parts of the province in 2019. These climate hazards often resulted in prolonged power outages and tested the robustness of municipal and provincial emergency response plans. Secondly, the project was also timely because it helped participating municipalities inform their climate adaptation and resilience initiatives. Participating municipalities were already working on resilience. However, the degree of progress and formalization of this work varied from a municipality to another. Some municipalities were developing adaptation plans, while others preferred to work on an ad hoc basis because of a lack of capacity. In all cases, participating municipalities have been confronted to limited human and financial resources, and this is particularly true for small municipalities. Quest projects helped them to overcome some of these barriers by providing much needed expertise. Finally, the project was timely because energy utilities have also been working on adaptation and resilience measures, with utilities being more proactive in provinces that have experienced repeated severe atmospheric hazards over the past decades. Energy utilities were interested in listening to the needs of municipalities and help them inform their local adaptation and resilience efforts. In other words, the project confirmed the need for more collaboration between municipalities and energy utilities to improve the resilience of energy system. Quest team has prepared a report that presents key lessons learned during this initiative on 3 aspects: common strengths and vulnerabilities among communities, key recommendations selected by municipalities to adapt their energy system to climate change, and major challenges communities are facing to develop and implement these adaptation measures. The report is publicly available and can be downloaded from our website. And so we'll go through this report during the rest of the presentation.
So we'll now share some of the strengths and areas of improvement identified through our work across several categories, including governance and coordination, planning and land use, communications infrastructure, and infrastructure for energy and water and wastewater, and transportation, and more. Beyond the unique characteristics resulting from the different provincial context and climate change and geography, the different levels of municipal leadership, we were able to identify some common strengths and vulnerabilities among the participating municipalities. So to start with the common strengths. In terms of emergency planning, it was not surprising to find that most municipalities have an emergency plan in place that is regularly reviewed. But those also need to be updated to include and respond to new risks presented with a changing climate. Most communities have exercised their plans recently, at least once a year, but were recommended to conduct more frequent tabletop discussions on a variety of climate hazards and to involve further community members. On the coordination and communication side, further strengths were identified with respect to understanding the roles and responsibilities and how to communicate with the public before, during, and after an event. Most, I think, elected councils have been briefed or trained on those responsibilities. However, councils are elected and after every election need to be rebriefed. Most communities had informal alliances with neighboring communities for emergency response, fire services, and so on, and in some cases with local suppliers for resources. Even a few municipalities had formalized MOUs or standing agreements for procurement. Local government and other levels of government have some programs in place to regularly assess schools, hospitals, and health facilities for maintenance, compliance with building codes, general safety, and weather-related risks. Public alerting networks also exist both at the local and provincial level. In some cases, there were improvements identified. Most municipalities have a communication plan for promoting emergency preparedness and alerting public on impending events. However, they're not proactive in educating and engaging the public and vulnerable populations on climate risk and adaptation measures. Some municipalities require specific improvements to ensure reliable communication systems. All municipalities identified stationary and mobile backup power on most, but not all, essential facilities. This would include primarily emergency measures centers, water treatment facilities, lift stations, and so on. We found that many communities had, let's say, unofficial shelters without backup power or heat. Most municipalities identified alternative sources of fuel for generators in case of interruptions, and risk prevention on, for example, tree trimming is also something that's common across all municipalities. Most communities have a contact tree, however, may need to be updated on an annual basis. Half of the communities had an existing community energy plan, which identifies opportunities to improve efficiency and develop local energy sources and potentially help or complement backup for critical facilities. From a land use planning perspective, there did appear to be increased consideration for climate change in land use planning and asset management planning during the current and recent reviews of those plans. There's an increased awareness of the role of natural assets, for example, natural buffers, retention ponds, green space, and other bioretention measures to reduce stormwater runoff. But these are not often formalized in a comprehensive strategy or policy or land use plan. Most municipalities have separate or mostly separated stormwater and sewer systems, but it remained unclear if stormwater systems can handle 1 in 100-year floods. So, along with the strengths, we identified some common vulnerabilities. We've made recommendations to each municipality for addressing these areas and presented those in our second workshop. With respect to energy infrastructure, and based on the success of having brought together municipalities and utilities through this project and the emerging discussions and potential opportunities for improving resilience, that needs to continue beyond a one-day workshop. So I think we can agree that more communication is required between utilities and municipalities on areas to prioritize for restoration. There's also a reliance on the main electrical grid. There's no alternative generation sources in many cases. So there's a need to support community energy plans and the implementation of those renewable energy projects, and specifically, the barriers remain. Municipally owned utilities also have particular opportunities and need particular measures. This could include smart metering, storage, backup power systems, and so forth. There's not enough public education on emergency plans and shelters, the do's and don'ts during power outages, and where to go. Missing backup power for some key infrastructure, such as lift stations, emergency shelters, schools, fuel stations, animal shelters, grocery stores, and banks, all included in that. There's a collaboration between municipalities and utilities, but it can be improved to reduce the risk from prolonged energy supply interruptions. And in some municipal cases, there was no alternative sources of fuel identified for generators, and key suppliers such as fuel stations and groceries in particular don't always have backup. This is something that can be required in the permitting process. So on the emergency management side, emergency plans that I indicated earlier need to better capture climate projections and hazards. Most municipalities don't currently have copies of emergency plans for other local stakeholders and are unaware of their expectations. So there could be some closer collaboration required there. Most municipalities do not have an updated voluntary registry of vulnerable persons, but these are typically maintained by other entities, the emergency measures, the fire services, the health authority, for example. None of the municipalities had official cooling centers identified for increased potential for hot days and heat waves. From a water infrastructure perspective, those communities with partial separation of stormwater and sewer systems may need to look at increased in their asset management planning and normal operations, the replacement of pipes and improvements there. There's still an underutilization of bioretention practices. This can be formalized through zoning and zoning amendments, policies, even municipal planning and infrastructure. There are potential vulnerabilities that remain in the 1 in 100-year flood events due to rainfall, as well as for sea level rise. And as we mentioned earlier, backup power is missing for a number of key infrastructure. We can move to communication. There's a lack of regular updates to council during events, and in terms of keeping them briefed and informed so they can have a consistent message to the public. Public education and communication can be more effective, especially on preparedness kits in case of prolonged power outages, and taking a more proactive approach for that. There's a lack of regular community-wide training exercises and tabletop exercises, in particular targeting vulnerable groups and how to make sure that they get information they need and can respond appropriately or have the supports in place. In some cases, there's improvements to communication system reliability in terms of backup power or backup communication systems. From a planning perspective, as I mentioned earlier, key planning documents don't always incorporate climate risk and projections and must do so on a recurring basis every 5 years or whenever they're reviewed. There's an underutilization of the natural asset management approach that can be better formalized. A lot of plans don't prohibit development, but could potentially include flood risk resilience, building requirements in the permitting process, as well as there needs to be better planning for existing infrastructure within flood risk zones. Many cases, existing developments are legally allowed to rebuild in the same location and manner, even if the municipality knows there are risks to doing so and can't afford to buy them out. In some municipalities, there are no minimum elevation building standards and bylaws, and this can include for electrical equipment in those buildings. There's a need to increase training across all municipal staff using, for example, ICS, Integrated Communication System, climate adaptation and resilience. Most communities also don't have an inventory of skills and resources in the community or could update one. So that's enough for me. I'm going to turn it back to Ida.
So I will now focus more on the utility side. Energy utilities are starting to consider the impact of climate change in their process and practices. Firstly, they are learning from past extreme weather events. So all the energy utilities we have worked with are developing process to record lessons learned from past emergency situations. This process aims both at strengthening communication and relationship with key stakeholders, as well as at hardening their infrastructure and assets. They have also developed mutual aid agreements, and they are making improvements to outage detection, response, and recovery. For example, most utilities are modeling 3 days before an event to determine what crews are needed and pre-dispatch them. Secondly, transmission and distribution utilities are investing in automated system monitoring in order to gather and analyze real-time data. They're installing new systems on their substations, feeders, and transformers, such as supervisory control and data acquisition devices, and for some, smart meters. And the idea here is to detect, map, and track outages in real time. Thirdly, they have started to adapt their business and operation to municipalities and consumers' demand for more local and reliable energy systems with more cooperation on district energy system projects. Finally, energy utilities are more proactive in informing the public on emergency plans and on what to do and not to do in case of prolonged power outage. They are developing dedicated websites or web pages and shifting to new standards by encouraging, for example, households to have an 96-hour emergency kit, for example. But the collaboration between utilities and municipalities is just starting, and therefore there is still room for improvement. Energy utilities could be more proactive in working with municipalities to develop more resilient infrastructure, to respond to new demands and expectations, as well as to adopt more proactive adaptation planning measures, especially on the following areas: identification of local risks and alignment of asset management and emergency management plans, support for community energy projects, involvement of municipalities in restoration and preparedness plans, and improvements in flood response. Another area where collaboration between municipalities and utilities can be increased is on conducting vulnerability assessments and integrating them in planning strategy. So they could work, for example, together on full assessment of sea rise level and flood risk, as well as on identifying and prioritizing potential relocations of energy assets and infrastructures. During the project, Quest also noted similar challenges among Canadian communities that are slowing down, delaying, and sometimes preventing the implementation of adaptation plans and measures adopted by the community, and as well as the recommendation that Quest have made. And so these challenges can be categorized in three main buckets. So the first bucket is not really a surprise. It's a lack of financial resources. Most municipalities do not currently have the budget and financial capacity to invest in new resilient infrastructure and or to upgrade existing ones. One of the most recurring questions, for example, was who pays for what? For instance, who should pay for installing backup power? In some cases, projects spread over a region and involve multiple stakeholders. And there is a lack of clarity on responsibilities on who should fund the project and make the upfront investment. In addition, there is limited and insufficient federal and provincial funding sources for proactive adaptive measures. Participating municipalities felt that it was difficult to access the level of funding needed to harden existing infrastructure, as well as to invest in public communication. In most cases, large funding programs are reactive and support post-disaster recovery. Paradoxically, there is also a sense of saturation. Given the multiple federal and provincial agencies and ministries offering funding related to resilience and climate adaptation, it is challenging for municipalities to stay on the top of what they are eligible for and to comply with timeline due to capacity issues. The second bucket of challenges relates to limited human resources and building in-house capacity. Climate adaptation is a relatively new area of governance for municipalities. It is challenging for them to incorporate these new responsibilities into existing practices, planning documents, and organizational structure. It is also difficult to recruit and retain experienced staff. For instance, 3 out of 12 municipal staff involved in this project left and were replaced by colleagues. The third bucket of challenges relates to a lack of alignment and communication between the 3 levels of government. For instance, municipalities do not have the power to constrain residents and businesses to take mitigation measures or change building codes. Sometimes there is also a lack of communication. For instance, municipalities do not have a clear understanding to what extent local schools provide training or education to their students on disaster risk reduction within the curriculum. Finally, there were also questions about the implications of vulnerability assessments. What is the role of the municipality and of other levels of government when a zone already developed has been identified in a flood area? Who should support landowners and ensure insurance premiums remain affordable? Those are questions that do not have clear answers. On the utility side, there's also some challenges that utilities have to face. First, they have to learn to deal with uncertainty and cope with increasing costs. It is difficult to anticipate the number of storms that will impact energy infrastructures, as well as the damage they will produce. Past events help, but they are not accurately capturing future climate projection. It is therefore difficult to effectively budget for costs associated with restoration and set aside a reserve fund. In addition, transmission and distribution utilities are usually nonprofit or regulated corporations, meaning that most of them have limited funding mechanisms for preventing adaptation measures and restoration. Costs have to be passed on to consumers through rates or mitigated through mitigating through cut costs somewhere else. There are also issues related to rising insurance costs. And finally, despite starting investing in device to obtain real-time data, energy utilities operating at the provincial level still rely on consumers to report outages, as well as crews on the ground to determine its size and impact. Upgrading the transmission and distribution systems requires large investments that are not always aligned with asset management plans and capital investment priorities.
So I also want to say it's not all bad news. There's lots of things that municipalities can and are doing and have undertaken since we've undertaken our work with them. So now I'm going to highlight some of those key benefits of our approach to the participating municipalities. Thanks to this project, the municipalities were able to quickly gain a better understanding of their weaknesses, the areas of improvement, the strengths that they have to become a resilient community. Participating municipalities benefited from the project in two major ways. The first, the workshop was designed to be inclusive and engage the key stakeholder groups that led to a more collaborative approach to climate adaptation, sharing knowledge, and resilience. Workshop participants were able to break internal and external silos. Virtually all of the participants, including municipal staff, elected members of the council, representatives from emergency measures organizations, provincial organizations, local businesses, and energy utilities, valued the intersectoral design of the workshops. Participating municipalities were also able to build bridges between municipal departments. Responsibilities and roles related to climate adaptation and risk management are usually scattered over different departments, and there's little mechanism for cohesion and integration. The project was a first step towards more interdepartment collaboration on climate adaptation and establishing a governance structure. The project was also helpful in building bridges between utilities and municipal staff, especially as it relates to public education, emergency preparedness, mitigating risks on the ground in municipal services, and disaster response and recovery. Second, the project offered an integrated and systemic resilience approach. Through this project, municipalities identified key documents and governance processes that they could leverage. For example, asset management planning, land use planning, emergency management, and so forth. By the end of the project, most municipalities also identified and implemented low-hanging fruit to advance climate adaptation and resilience, such as supporting cases for council approvals and flood zone bylaws and plan review. Adopting green energy zoning standards also, I should add to that. applying for funding for adaptation measures such as flood risk reduction and sea level rise risk mitigation in the city of St. John in this case. Driving other initiatives such as community training and education. This would be particularly true in the city of Charlottetown. Collaborating with their utility on resilience measures, all municipalities, by establishing new points of contacts and regular points of contacts, and informing the development and update of climate adaptation plans, which are being finalized this year, and emergency management plans, as well as asset management plans. Over to you, Ida.
Yes, so now like it's part of the conclusion. Again, like it was a dense presentation with lots of information. If you want to take the time to review what we discussed today, you can download the lesson learned report on our website. All the information we presented today are in this report, and there is even like more details and tables. So really feel free to go there. Also, Quest has published a community resilience mini guide that provides tips and resources for communities interested in becoming more resilient, as well as interested in developing an effective education communications plan. And also this mini guide explores possible funding strategies for municipalities or community at large. And so we hope that you can leverage these two publications for your community to plan for resilience. If your community is interested in learning more about climate risks and vulnerability assessments and recommendations, as well as learning more about community energy mapping and community energy planning, you can reach out to us as we provide advisory services to municipalities, utilities, and developers. You can also support Quest's work by becoming a subscriber and benefit from our working groups, our knowledge exchange opportunities, and project participation. You will also be able to connect with the Smart Energy Community Marketplace. We'd like also to let you know that Quest will continue working on resilient energy infrastructure with 4 Albertan municipalities through a new project funded by the Commission for Environmental Cooperation. And the purpose of this project is to refine the tools that we developed for this project and to adapt this to the Alberta energy landscape, as well as to research a bit more what has been done on the utility side and the potential role of distributed energy resources in building more resilient community. Finally, as a side, I also wanted to briefly mention that Quest has launched this week the Smart Energy Community Benchmark. It's a new tool to help communities to become smart energy community. And so through 10 key indicators, communities can undertake a comprehensive scoring to measure their local capacity and the resources that need to be in place for an effective management and integration of infrastructure in order to use, move, and source energy as efficiently and locally as possible. And this also helps to build more resilient energy communities. Already we are at the end of our presentation, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. So please again, use the chat function to ask your questions, and my colleague Charlotte will be moderating the questions.
Yeah, so we already have a few questions here. We can start with this one. So we are in a city in Montreal area with 30,000 populations. How can we participate in your program, and what's the procedure?
It's a good question. You can actually reach out to either Eddie or Ida here, and we can provide you more information regarding our advisory services for resiliency planning. And it follows a very similar outline of what we presented today.
Nice. Another question here. So did clean air shelters come up? Any guidance available out there for this, or portable air cleaners?
I think that was regarding clean air shelters and portable air cleaners. Mm-hmm. That did not come up in my memory within any of the communities we worked with.
Okay. Are the specific recommendation to each community captured within the guides as well?
Yes, we do, not all of them, but we put in our report the most common recommendations that have been adopted or that have been selected by municipalities. And many of them are related to increase better communication and public education. It's also around better coordination between the different departments of a municipality, as well as better coordination with other stakeholders, as well as looking at energy community projects and community energy mapping as a way to build more resilient energy infrastructure. So looking at what is possible to do in terms of backup power with renewable energy projects, for example, how to, yeah, these kind of things. You want to add something, Eddie?
No, I think that covered it.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question here. Do any of the communities studied use embedded CHP generators as an alternate source of power or if during grid failures? And if not, is this being considered as a community resiliency solution?
You know, if the municipality has a community energy plan, it's likely they've identified opportunities for renewable and alternative sources of generation in their community. I can't say if any of the municipalities specifically have CHP generators for grid failure purposes at this point. But CHP does exist in, for example, some of the municipalities. I'm just not sure it's tasked for that, and I'm not sure that it's part of their community energy plans. Certainly as one of the options that exists if it's viable within that community.
Great, thank you, Eddie. So we have one last question, but if anyone has more questions, we still have some time. So how does...
Yeah. No, sorry.
Okay, so how does your process integrate with the BARC process of climate change adaptation?
Right, so the ECLI-BARC process is known and is available to municipalities. When we designed this project roughly 2 years ago, we were relying on other tools that exist that were federally funded or federally endorsed for resilience planning, and those included the 10 Essentials for Disaster Risk Reduction and the JIBC Rural Disaster Resilience Portal Initiative. We added to that some of our own expertise around mapping and map exercises to engage communities in identifying risk and resilience measures.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So we have a comment. Great to learn about community resilience initiatives. My concern and question is related to local builders and real estate developers. How this community help and support community resilience initiatives?
So here I will say that there is two things. The first is really our workshop, the workshop that we've delivered are really designed to foster collaboration and dialogue between different stakeholders. So we also bring developers around the table, and this is an opportunity for energy utilities, municipal staff, and them to have start this conversation. I think also with the asset mapping, vulnerability mapping, looking at already at the map of the community and where are the risks, and for example the flooding area, the areas where there is subject maybe that are prone to wildfire. The idea is also like to bring awareness and educate around like, okay, here is some risk that we have identified. How can we work together to make sure that there is no that we can mitigate those risks and the impact on the population. I would say that, however, at the community level, it's really hard to have any strong impact because many of the building codes, for example, are more at the provincial levels. So there is also a need of collaborating with the province to set some building codes or development standards. But there have been also a lot of work done by municipalities to develop kind of a resilience standard for new communities as well. I don't know, Eddie, if you have something to add.
No, that's good.
Great, thank you. What type of trainings do you recommend for municipal workers to get them more knowledgeable about climate efficiency methods in capital assets?
Well, for one, I think that they can make make use of some available tools that are designed specifically for small and rural communities, as well as medium and sized towns, to be able to analyze and assess their own climate risk and their potential resilience and measures they can take. So using the same tools that we use in this process, I believe that that type of training is available free online for anyone that wishes to do so. There could be additional training around ICS that some municipalities provide, emergency measures organizations provide. This is with respect to emergency preparedness and response. I should add the emergency measures community has been making more of an investment of time into the risk mitigation, so reducing the risk before those bad days happen, and not just having a good plan in place for when those bad days happen. But of course, every province is different, and we had to take that context, that reality, into consideration in working with all of the municipalities.
And I would like also to add that FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, has also is offering a lot of webinar and workshops for free for municipalities around climate and asset management. So I would also recommend to look at their webpage.
Yes, that's great. So this person just specified that is in Toronto. Do you have any specific training in Toronto in mind, or maybe not?
I think I would have to check with my colleagues to know if there was anything specifically available in Toronto, but it's likely that the city government is offering ICS training within their staff and the emergency measures organization.
Okay, great.
And as far as, I will say again, and as far as adaptation and resilience planning, there are free available tools to municipalities to assess their own risk and resilience measures. And those include two of the tools that we used in our process. But of course, capacity is often a challenge. So what we offer is the ability to walk you through that process and in much more depth than you might otherwise on your own, I guess would be the response.
Right, so we don't have any more questions unless we have last question now, but oh, we have one more. Is there a charge for the support?
There is for advisory services. There is opportunities as well to be engaged in our future projects. Of course, Ida mentioned one of them, which was the Alberta focused one under Commission for Environmental Cooperation and NRCAN grant. There is another potential opportunity we're waiting to hear on, and that would involve cities or communities from coast to coast. And certainly we would like to keep you informed of that opportunity. So we would encourage you to join us, join our newsletter, maybe join as a subscriber. There's a number of benefits to doing so, including being kept up to date on projects and opportunities. If you're a provider of services, to connect with the municipal marketplace and advance smart energy communities with us.
But if you just to precise that, if you want to see the report, it's free and it's online. Yes. On questcanada.org.
It is, yes.
Great. Yeah, so if you have more questions, okay, another one. Can you repeat the FCN organization as a resource? What are they called?
Okay, so it's a FCM, so Federation of Canadian Municipalities.
Yeah.
And they provide, if you Google Federation of Canadian Municipalities climate assets or climate assets management, you will find they have some resources, and they also provided workshops in different parts, including they've done some in Toronto. Maybe they're planning to do more. I will suggest you just to connect on their website.
Thank you, Ida. We have another question here. In the case of province-wide utilities, do you have any recommendations for how they should approach engaging municipalities in risk identification and emergency planning initiative? Or do you recommend that they focus on engaging the province and lean on them to engage with the muni?
I'm not sure I clearly understand the question, but I think it's both. I think that there needs to be a certain level of understanding that provincial policies are required, guidance is required for some provinces around land use planning. Utilities need to be able to afford the adaptation measures with their infrastructure. Municipalities can enact certain policies to encourage backup systems, efficiency, and other renewable energy resources being integrated where feasible. So it's definitely not on the shoulders of one organization or one sector. It requires collaboration, but we're seeing some very common areas where those areas of improvement exist. And I think if we're able to communicate that within the municipalities and to the utilities and to the provincial governments we've worked with, that we can start getting traction on filling the gaps that exist. Of course, each province is different, so how that looks will look different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Edie. Another question here. So there are 10,000 microgrids in the world, more than new 10,000 microgrids projects under development at the moment. Does Quest have practical expertise in this field for resilient solution?
A great question. Certainly we recognize the role of microgrids play, and some communities have identified that as an option in pursuing their self-reliance, self-sufficiency goals. Quest itself is technology agnostic and fuel agnostic. We do work with a network of subscribers that offer services, expertise, and technologies such as microgrid systems, smart metering, right through to renewable energy systems, energy auditing, energy monitoring, and I think that list probably numbers in the 100. So the idea is to coordinate that as a national network and connect those providers within the marketplace.
Great. We have a question. Will this presentation be available in PDF after the webinar? So yes, we will provide, we recorded this webinar and we will provide you, it will be available on our website.
And make sure to send an email to all the participants so they can have access to the link to the webpage where they can download the report.
Yeah. So we don't have more questions at the moment.
Great. So thank you again, everyone, for attending this workshop. Both the report and the mini guide are available on our website for download. We will follow with each of you with an email, so you can also access not only the link to our webpage where you can download the reports, but also where you can find the presentation. Thank you again, and if you have any further questions, don't hesitate to contact Eddie or I. We'll be more pleased than answer, and to help you as much as we can.
And thanks everybody for joining us today. We're very happy to share those results and look forward to hearing from you.